years, I believe. I teach in the area of Christian education, and now it's youth and young adult ministry. Y'all see how that connects in a few minutes. I'm grateful to President Rector and Dean Rivera and COF for the opportunity for me to be on sabbatical back in the fall of 2016, I believe. It took a while to get to this sabbatical lecture, and I think I'm even up for renewal. But it's great to be here. It's great to be able to share this time with you and to share this topic with you of adulting and the spiritual lives of millennials. So, before we get started, I'm a Christian educator. And so, being a Christian educator, that means that I don't do all the talking. It means that I need some involvement from you. And so this is what I'd like for you to do for the first few moments of our time. I want you to think about how did you know that you had become an adult? What was the marker or markers that determined, all right, I'm an adult now? And if by chance you're still working on that, what do you feel are the markers that will help you determine when you have arrived? Make sense? So, in great Christian education fashion, why don't you turn to your neighbor and have a discussion in twos or threes. When did you determine that you were an adult? What were the markers? Or when do you know that you will have arrived? All right. I would love to hear all of your stories, but I know that I'm not going to be able to. But I'd like to hear from a few of you. And I'd like to hear from those who feel like you already are an adult. And I like to hear the brave souls who will say, I'm still adulting. All right? So, those who might feel you've already are living like an adult, what were the markers? How did you know that you arrived?
I come from Puerto Rico, and so the cultural expectation was that, in my case, when you finish college, that is a mark for becoming an adult. And so the expectation was, after you do that, then you get a job, think about family, if that's what you want, and then live independently, and assume responsibility for all your needs and cares and bills.
All right, so I heard a few things in there. Finish college, get a job, consider family, most importantly, live independently. Anybody else? Thank you. Yes?
I come from Trinidad, and you lived home. So when I felt comfortable enough to leave home and actually live independently of my parents, I had to cook for myself and all of that, I knew I was an adult.
And if I could, I mean, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. Could you tell me what age that was when you arrived at that?
21.
21.
20.
One more person who already feels like they're living the life of an adult. What was the marker that helped you? Yes, sir.
I live as a youthful adult, but when I had to make decisions about how my life was going to be in relationship to society. So when I turned 18, I had to register for the draft during the Vietnam War. And when I made decisions about how to act out politically, in spite of knowing that my parents wouldn't do the same thing, but being comfortable in telling them that that's what I was going to do because I wanted them to know. So it was a kind of a moment of independence that way.
So I'm hearing this common theme of independency. And in your particular case, making the decision to answer the draft.
Well, resist the draft.
Resist the draft. Those who are still working on adulting, anyone wants to share? How will you know that you have arrived? Yes.
Well, I'm still working on it. And what I shared with them, one of the ways that I do feel more adult now is that I'm not like all the way connected to my family system anymore. Like I can kind of opt in and opt out. I don't always have to, like the things that my parents decide that the family's gonna do doesn't mean that I have to do it. And just like the separation there, like I have a distinction between me and between them. But how do I feel like I will know that I have arrived? I'm still not sure. Yeah, maybe when I have my own furniture.
That's real, y'all. And if you had to give a hope or a guess, or at least a hope, when do you hope that you'll get there?
26.
At what age?
When I
26?
graduate from here.
Excellent. Someone else?
I was going to say that 26 year cutoff, at least in the state of Illinois, is also when young adults are no longer on their parents' insurance. And so that could be a marker for some of adulthood.
Okay. So the insurance thing, and so that too being a marker, but I'm also hearing this independent thing, being able to buy your own furniture. And not necessarily on credit card, but it's all paid for. That's asking too much. One more. We might still be in the process of moving toward adulthood. Yes, sir.
It was funny you would say that because after talking about this and feeling like, oh, no, I hit the marker for adulthood, returning back to school in some ways is like this kind of regression where like you were an adult and then now you come back into this space and you're like, I'm like a part-time adult or still, and somehow another thing like graduation becomes the return in some ways. So there's
sometimes it's a back and forth. And is it a back, do you feel like you regress because you're now having to be dependent on others?
in some ways, yeah. But also you just don't have the kinds of independence that you do when you're not in school. Like other folks, things have claims on your time, energies that are some ways different.
Let's keep all of this in the back of our minds and thoughts as we move forward. I'll quickly share that I believe that the marker for me was when at 17 years old, my mother and my uncle dropped me off at Tuskegee Institute. They gave me about $20. That's about all they had. And we're praying for your son and wishing you the best. And from then on, I had to figure out all the way through how school was going to be paid for, how livelihood was going to be covered, how everything was. I had no resources to go back to. I had to help create those resources. And so it was both being an adult and adulting at the same time, still growing, still learning, and all of that, but all of that happening at the same time. And grateful for those who were available to mentor me along the way. I'll say more about that as we move forward. So all my career, I've been working with, researching, teaching about, and teaching with the millennial generation. as I was working on this project, it was really a major aha for me. I've been walking with the millennial generation for a while. And so for the purposes of our conversation, I'm going to use the Pew Research Center's birth timeline for millennials, which is 1981 to 1996. So in this year, 2018, millennials are between the age, based on Pew Research, between the ages of 22 and 37. May I ask for those who are willing to share 22 to 37 that's in the room? All right. So I'm also asking you to keep me honest in the conversation that we had today as well, okay? And so 22 to 37. And I started directly working with millennials during their teen years, starting in 1995. And for 13 years, I had the opportunity to work with some remarkable young people through the Youth Theological Initiative at Emory University, and through a program that we had here at Garrett-Evangelical called Faith Passage. And each of these programs were designed to engage high school youth in Christian theological education. It was funded by a grant by the Lilly Endowment, and the hope of these programs were that young people attending would fall in love with theology as a lifelong pursuit and would become cadres of public theologians. Young people would be, and this would be young people who are willing to take their faith and apply their faith to whatever their calling in life may be. And we would be doing this through, as far as cultivating them for church and society. As a side note, one of our alumni from the program we did here at Garrett, Faith Passage, is Dr. Michelle Watkins, who was in the very first program that we started, was in the very first class. And Michelle went on to Howard University, then came back to Garrett and did her MDiv and her PhD, and she is now assistant professor of theology at Iliff Seminary, School of Divinity. The young people with whom I experienced through these programs were absolutely amazing. They were bright, articulate, and eager to learn and to grow. They truly wanted to wrestle with issues of faith. They wanted to know that God mattered, and they also wanted to know whether who they are really mattered to God. They were not afraid to ask the tough questions and struggle with more than one right answer. They found a place where their thoughts were taken seriously, their voices heard, and their status as emerging adults recognized. And what I learned from these amazing young people is that they weren't looking for adults to be their peers. They yearned for loving, caring relationships with adults willing to hear them and willing to guide them. Adults were cool, not because they acted like them, but because adults cared for them. And I also learned how powerful the socializing forces of family and friends, school, and popular culture were in the lives of these young people at that time, as they wrestled to discover who they were. Many of these young people came from lives filled with stress and struggle. It didn't matter if their environment was from an elite and rich background or an urban and poor background. Each wrestled with their own stresses and strains. But what the Youth Theological Initiative and Faith Passage gave these young people were new lenses to see the world. They were given many opportunities to wrestle with their identity and purpose theologically, and many of them ultimately made different choices as to what they would commit their lives to because of their experience. These young people entered these programs yearning for more. They yearned to better understand their relationship with God and with Jesus. They yearned to know God's meaning and purpose for their lives. It was rarely articulated that concisely, but it was echoed in the questions they asked and the desire for more and more conversation about their faith and its meaning for their lives. And it was during that time that I observed at least 7 spiritual yearnings expressed by these young people. One of the yearnings was identity, a yearning to understand who they are. to answer the question, who am I or whose am I? A yearning to understand what does it mean to be made in the image of God? A yearning to understand what does it really mean to call oneself a Christian? A yearning to know who am I in God's greater story? Another yearning was purpose. A yearning to understand their reason for being. To be able to answer, why am I here? What role do I play in God's greatest story? Another yearning was intimacy. A yearning to be loved unconditionally by God, by the church, by family, and by the greater society. And another yearning was healing. This was a yearning to be whole again. To be whole again after experiencing various levels of brokenness. And what was quite interesting, amazing, even a little bit saddening, of the young people that I encountered, all of them, by the time they reached their teenage years, had experienced some level of brokenness and had this yearning to be made whole again. Another yearning of mentoring, a yearning for a caring leader, spiritual director, pastor, interested enough to help them navigate the waters between adolescence and adulthood. A yearning for nurture, a yearning to be encouraged and empowered in the midst of their faith development, spiritual development. And a yearning for courage, a yearning for strength, to live a life of Christian faith when it seemed mostly countercultural to the world around them. Now, these 7 were not new concepts that I dreamt up myself, gave names to. Other disciplines use these terms to address developmental needs of adolescents. Yet at the same time, I saw these areas as deeper spiritual concerns needing pastoral attention in the lives of young people. They may be developmental concerns, but they are equally, if not more so, spiritual yearnings, seeking fulfillment within the heart and spirits of young people. And I have spent much of my career sharing with many in a variety of ways these spiritual yearnings, and to reconsider how do we do ministry with youth, with young people, in light of these yearnings. So it was an awesome opportunity to be asked by the Lilly Endowment to then begin looking at how do we do ministry with young adults. And by the time that we received this call, the teens that I had worked with are now young adults. And so I've been tracking the millennial generation for all of these years. And so the Lilly Endowment asked us to be part of 12 seminaries and other organizations to serve as innovation hubs. Serve as innovation hubs that would work with other congregations to be able to assist these congregations in being able to establish and help launch ministries that would nourish and enrich the religious lives of young adults ages 23 through 29. And here were some of their reasons why. There are young adults who yearn for authentic Christian experiences that nourish and support their religious lives. When they approach congregations, however, they too often encounter barriers that limit their full participation in congregational life. These barriers can cause them to feel that they need to search beyond the walls of Christian churches for the kind of experiences that would enrich their religious lives. Congregations desire to connect with these young adults, but they easily slip into default practices of ministry that are unhelpful and can unintentionally push away young adults rather than draw them into relationship and participation. And by learning about and building relationship with these young adults, congregations would be better prepared to design and launch innovative new ministries for and with those in young adulthood. And so as we looked at these concerns of Lily, we began to shape our own program, which I did during my sabbatical, in helping to shape this grant project. And with the help of Dory Baker and several others, we developed a program which we call Holy Yearnings, Holy Listening, and Holy Partnership. Because we believed, we had this hunch that there were still yearnings that millennials were still wrestling with, that was still present in their lives. From the time that they were teenagers, when we were thinking about that during that time, to the time now. And so we developed this project around what we're calling Holy Yearnings, Holy Listening, and Holy Partnerships. If you were to turn to page 2 in this report that we have.
Reggie, do you have any more?
Yes, we have some here at the table. We developed this program around 3 phases. The first phase is working with what we call mentoring congregations. And during this phase, we identified 10 congregations for whom we felt were doing young adult ministry well. And we asked each of those congregations to select a young adult in their congregation that we would that would serve as a congregational fellow for our project. And their responsibility would be to have conversations, to engage in what we call holy listening with other young adults in their congregation and outside of their congregation, to be able to glean these young adults' feelings and thoughts about their own spiritual and religious life. If you were to turn to page 10, what we did was train these congregational fellows in a process called Design Thinking 101, and in particular focused in on the first portion of that process, which is called empathy. And as you will read in the project, the fellows approached the empathy phase by hearing young adults' experiences and perspectives about faith and community. They sought to decipher what motivates young adults to engage with congregations. And the fellows conducted hour-long ethnographic interviews with 30 young adults in their 20s and 30s about their experiences in their congregations, their faith backgrounds, and their lifestyle more broadly. These 10 fellows were asked to identify 3 young adults that they would interview. They gathered that information, engaged in this 1-hour ethnographic conversation with these young adults. And then what we were able to do from there, as you return to page 11, is to then bring all of these interviews together and engage in what we call story harvesting. where after we transcribed all of the 30 interviews that we did, engage in this process of being able to hear in the room what was shared with these congregational fellows. And from there, be able to draw themes from the voices of the young adults from which we heard. And as we began to see these themes emerge, I discovered that many of these themes were very much related to the spiritual yearnings that I had experienced and I had observed in these young people when they were teenagers. And I'll make some connections for you as we move forward in them. You see that the 7 themes are welcoming and accessible, relevant and relatable leaders, relationships, connection and community, spiritual practices, social justice oriented, painful past, experiences of church, and ambivalence about Christian labor. So if you were to turn to page 12, one of the first themes was welcoming and accessibles. Interviewees found communities where they feel accepted and comfortable being themselves, places where they are truly seen. In some cases, the church offered a casual, warm, and joyful atmosphere. Their churches exhibit an openness to diversity that speaks to the young adults' inclusive values. And on that page, you'll see quotes that spoke to this theme that emerged out of the interviews that were done. Would somebody read one?
I feel like myself here. I feel welcomed and affirmed. This is the kind of place I could bring a failure and feel like there are people to lift me up and be with me through it. Daniel, a 26-year-old white man.
Would somebody read one more?
Come as you are. I love that. And I love that the pastor has a sense of humor. That's finding the light in everything. Michelle, a 33-year-old Asian Pacific Islander woman.
So as we heard this recurring theme of welcoming, of yearning for a congregational place, community that was welcoming and accessible, it spoke to this yearning of intimacy. This yearning to be loved, to be cared for, to be embraced by a community that accepted them just as they are. The next one is relevant and relatable leaders, found on page 13. Interviewees value pastors who take time to cultivate relationships with them. They want to see themselves reflected in the people holding the mic. They hope pastors will be approachable role models they can emulate, with whom they can connect. They welcome opportunities to see the pastors as full people who are socially engaged and emotionally intelligent. Somebody be willing to read one of the quotes there.
I came back because the pastors were chill. They were really inviting and personable and seemed smart and interesting. Lisa, a 23-year-old white woman.
Someone read another.
Wouldn't it be awesome if there were more pastors willing to march in the gay pride parade, or willing to show up with Make Love Louder, or willing to go outside of the very safe, deliberate, protected spaces of Sunday morning pulpits? Jeff, a 37-year-old black man.
So as we read these quotes and hear these things that are connected to this recurring theme of relevant and relatable leaders, you hear this yearning for mentoring. You hear this yearning for a caring adult, a pastor or someone engaged in a pastoral type role, willing to guide and direct and be an example of what it means to live this Christian life. The next is relationships, connection, and community. Interviewees appreciated being seen, known, remembered, and sought out. They wanted to feel cared for without judgment. Feeling connected to God in community is a powerful draw for them. They want to leave feeling restored and nourished. They appreciate connections within church that expand to their daily lives. Will somebody read one of the quotes there?
Every time I go back to that church, I feel like this really strong feeling of restoration. I don't know, community is the only way to put it. Lori, a 28-year-old white woman.
And another?
I definitely feel connected to not only God, but to the people of God, which is one of the more important things for me. And a 28-year-old Korean American woman.
So as we hear this, I hear the yearning both of nurture as well as the yearning of intimacy. The voices of those who speak and have lifted up this theme of relationship and connection and community. Again, being in a place where they feel embraced and loved without judgment, be able to meet them where they are, as well as those willing to walk with them and strengthen them and nurture them as they are continuing to grow into who they are to become. And the next is spiritual practices. The young adults in our study are creating and adapting forms of prayer and ritual to fit their schedules, lifestyles, and preferences. They are interacting with prayer in a way to encounter the world and as a tool for managing stress and anxiety. Prayer is both a habit and an ongoing experiment. Someone read one of the quotes there.
I do pray every night before I go to bed, just out of life. It's something I've always done, so I continue to do it. I still go back and forth on whether it's silly, I guess. Samantha, 28 years old, all black mom.
Thank you. And another?
There's this grotto, and it's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and anyone can come in. It's at the back of the church off the alley. There are saints and a big Jesus, and you can light candles and sit there and pray quietly. When I didn't go to church and I needed to be alone, I would go there and center myself. Melanie, a 31-year-old Hispanic woman.
And in this theme of spiritual practices, you hear a few yearnings there. Intimacy, connection with God. You hear identity, and you hear a desire and a yearning for nurturing. As they yearn for and search for practices, and I would say not just prayer, but other practices that would help them grow closer and closer, and again, make greater sense of this faith journey, this spiritual journey that they're encountering. Social justice oriented. Congregations struggling to interpret the gospel through the lens of contemporary issues such as racism, mass incarceration, sexual orientation, gender identity justice, poverty, and climate change are attracted to the interviewees. They want to be involved in churches where they can find like-minded sojourners committed to enacting their faith by working for the betterment of their world. Somebody read one of the quotes there.
I was looking for a place to have courage to do what I wouldn't do otherwise. So I have the ability to make decisions based on what I think my impact on the world would be. A lot of what gives me satisfaction is getting to that, actually following through on that.
And another?
The job description for worship leader actually had things about the community being LGBTQ inclusive and anti-racist. And I was like, this is kind of awesome. Now I find myself in a community where I can go out and be supported and know my church is fully behind what I'm doing on Gay Pride Day or in Black Lives Matters rally. Jeff, 37-year-old Black man.
So here we here in this theme, again, this yearning for purpose, to be able to be part of a congregation that helps them make sense of their reason for being in the world. What is it that God would have them to be, and what would God have them to do, and how would God have them to live? The next is painful past experience of the church. Many of our interviewees spent a period of time as church refugees after experiencing Christian communities that were limiting, painful, and hypocritical. They grappled with belief and belonging, and sometimes feeling ambivalent about their identities as Christian. Someone read one of the quotes.
Christians are so devoted about going to church, but they would just do so many hateful things to my mother and myself. And I never understood how you could be so devoted to going to church and spew hate. Jane, a 30-year-old Black woman.
And one more.
So my 4 years in college shook me to the core of what I was as a believer, so much so that I stopped going to church. Anna, 28-year-old Korean American.
So what we find in this theme is this yearning for healing. And for many of those who were interviewed, healing from hurtful experiences that they experienced in other congregations. And so we talked earlier about many of these young people in their teenage years had experienced some level of brokenness by the time that they reached their teenage years, and some of that even continued on. And for some of them, some of that brokenness experienced in the local congregation themselves. And so they yearn for a place where they could be made whole again. A congregation, a setting where healing can really and truly take place. And the last one is ambivalent about Christian label. Interviewees hesitate to call themselves Christian, even when they espouse belief in Jesus, are regular church attendees, and find meaning in being part of a church community. They are acutely aware of the stigma of the label and want to avoid being associated with people who do not share their values. Some struggle with not feeling Christian enough. Someone read.
People make assumptions about the word Christian, but within Jewish circles, I'm very happy to say, yeah, I'm Christian, because they're not going to put these evangelical conservative assumptions on me. Robin, a 27-year-old white transgender person.
And another.
The word Christian comes with a lot of baggage right now. In the place and time and culture that we live, I know that I inherit a lot of baggage with that word, and I'm not excited about all of that baggage.
So in these things, we see this yearning for identity. Who am I? As I embrace this thing called Christian, as I embrace this faith called Christian, who am I? And how do I live into this label? And what does that mean? Or do I live into this label at all? I encounter a number of young people who have no problem with Jesus. Matter of fact, love Jesus. it's the institutional, the religiosity, and the media's portrayal of what it means to be Christian that causes pause. And for many young people to not want to necessarily carry the label because of all of the things that they feel come with it. So what does it mean then to be part of a congregation who unashamedly understands itself as Christian and be able to provide a healthy understanding of what that means and how to live that out? And so as you see through this first phase of our work, we were able to hear the voices of young adults, or particularly these 30 young adults, and be able to glean and be able to see that this whole notion of seven spiritual yearnings continues in the lives of our young adults. In phase 2 of our project, we have taken 13 congregations through a semester-long training with further training around design thinking that they then use to be able to develop their own project, where they're going to be working to develop a young adult ministry within their congregations over the next year, a project related to that. We have some projects that are working with young adults around life skill issues. We have some projects that are working around the whole notion of what does it mean to help young people with the issue of friendship, as well as several other projects that we have taking place. And all of them have been awarded up to $30,000 to be able to engage in what we hope to be and what we believe to be very fruitful programs and projects that will aid them in help and also helping us better understand what is necessary to do ministry work with young adults. After the year project is done, we will be gathering these 13 congregations back together to gather their information. We're doing some coaching with them along the way so that we're gathering information that way as well. And we would then hope to be sharing our findings once the project is done. What excites me about this grant project that we're doing, this continued work with the millennial generation, is the information we'll be able to give back to local congregations who have a yearning and have a desire to do ministry with, and do ministry for, do ministry alongside young adults. But it also raises the question of what does it mean for theological education? Y'all saw the hands of the 22 to 37-year-olds that are in the room. What does it mean for us as a seminary to be able to take these themes seriously in our work and how we shape our curriculum and how we provide hospitality to our students and how we speak to their yearnings of identity and purpose and intimacy and healing and nurturing and mentoring and courage as they matriculate through Garrett-Evangelical. I'll save my thoughts on these for another conversation, but I do want to leave these with you for further conversation for us to have. Thank you.